Good evening. It is 6:30. We're going to call the Castle Hills regular city council meeting to order and determine if a quorum is present. Mr. Joyce will not be joining us tonight, but we do have a quorum. We will proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance. Chief Covey, will you lead us? Thank you, Chief. Okay, first up, we have introduction of new police officers. Chief Zuniga.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. We recently hired two officers. One of them is not going to be able to make it. She had an emergency that just came up. I guess her mom fell or something, so she just left. We'll still introduce her. So I'm gonna introduce Officer Dion McGee. He was formerly a commercial motor vehicle operator prior to becoming a law enforcement officer. He had wanted to be a law enforcement officer for a long time and was finally able to enroll and just recently graduated from the San Antonio College Police Academy. Officer McGee is in his 13th year of marriage to his wife, Yanette, and has two kids, Zelda and Connor. Please help me welcome Officer Dion McGee to the force. The other officer, female officer, Officer Maria Gabriola, applied and tested and was hired on as an academy cadet a couple of months ago prior to Mr. McGee, and just recently graduated also in the same class from San Antonio College Police Academy. Officer Gabriola has three kids, Yeseli, Herberto, and Nicholas. Officer Gabriola has always wanted to be a police officer and finally took the step after working in banking. I will say that Officer Gabriola is already setting us up for failure internally because today she brought a large box of colorful donuts, which seems cliche, and stated she's trying to fatten us up and so she can remain slim. Anyways, we would like to welcome Officer Gabriola to the force. And lastly, three of our officers were recently recognized by MAD, the organization Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And we were also nominated and awarded a certificate of congratulations for Outstanding Agency Award from the State Senator Jose Menendez. And that one being recognized as Outstanding Law Enforcement Agency given to law enforcement agencies that is making a difference by going above and beyond in the areas of education, prevention, policy, or enforcement, and whose efforts are making an impact in reducing alcohol-related deaths and injury on Texas roadways. Additionally, Sergeant Davila, Detective Munoz, and Corporal Earlywine were each recognized for their individual efforts as well on the DWI enforcement. To date, I believe we have, you said 111 DWIs as of last Friday on record for this year alone. Contrast to over the previous year. Of course, COVID year last year was a lot lower, but previously is about 55 to 65 arrests a year for DWI. So we pretty much doubled it already. Anyways, we presented the certificate by Matt and the State Senate. Thank you, Mayor, Council.
Thank you, Chief, and welcome to our new officers. Thank you so much for everything that y'all are doing. We've seen the Facebook videos and we know that y'all are working and keeping crime off the street. Thank y'all. Next up, we have citizen comments. Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll proceed to the consent agenda. Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Gregory. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. First order of business, public hearing on the possible amendment to zoning ordinance to add a provision stating that lots in the RR Rural Residential Zoning District that were less than 0.75 an acre in size on August 10th, 2021 to be considered legal lots. The owners of such lots shall not be required to obtain a variance due to the size of such lots to have a residence constructed or reconstructed on such lots, that the setbacks for such lots shall be the same as setbacks in single A family district. It is 6:35 and we will open the public hearing. There is nobody to speak on the public hearing. We will close the public hearing at 6:35. Next up, we have discussion and possible action on ordinance number 1012 of the City of Castle Hills Council, amending section 50, chapter 50 of the City of Castle Hills Code of Ordinances and adding section 50-399, stating that lots in the RR Rural Residential Zoning District that were less than 0.75 of an acre in size on August 10th, 2021 be considered legal lots, that owners of such lots shall not be required to obtain a variance due to the size of such lots to have a residence constructed or reconstructed on such lots, and that the setbacks for such lots shall be the same as setbacks in the A single-family district. Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 2021-10-12 as stated.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. May. Is that Mr. Isbrand? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Next up, we have public hearing on the application from Amber Nunez for a special use permit for the property located at 8006 West Avenue, Suite 1, legal description CB 5778B, in the City of Castle Hills, Bexar County, Texas, to provide microblading and permanent cosmetic services. It is 6:37 and we will open the public hearing. If there is nobody to speak, we will close the public hearing at 6:37. Okay, we'll put you up on the next agenda item, man. Item 6.4, 6:37, close the public hearing. 6.4, discussion of possible action on ordinance number 2021-10-12-21-A concerning a new issuance of a special use permit to Amber Nunez for a special use permit to provide microblading and permanent cosmetic services at the property located at 8006 West Avenue, Suite 1, legal description CB 5778B, in the City of Castle Hills, Bexar County, Texas. I believe we have Ms. Nunez with us. Council, as you remember, this is an amendment to our ordinances based on the fact that we don't allow tattooing, and we've determined that microblading, while tattooing, is a different type and not the traditional sense of tattooing. Mr. Rapley.
Mayor, just so you know that this has been approved before by zoning and council in the past for these microblading. And on October 5th, last Tuesday night, zoning unanimously approved this item.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Ms. Nunez, did you want to make any comments? Perfect, thank you. Do we have a motion? Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the city council adopt ordinance number 2021-10-12-A as stated.
Thank you, Mr. May.
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Isbrand. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Nunez. 6.5, discussion of possible action on resolution 2021-10-12, authorizing the city to enter into an interlocal agreement between the City of Castle Hills and with CPS Energy to facilitate Castle Hills improvement of streets and infrastructure, and authorizing the city manager to execute such an agreement. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for the current project, the Carrollwood and Banyan Phase 2. This is the same type of agreement we entered in with CPS on Phase 1 on the Banyan project. This is I think the gas work that they have to do as part of the project. As part of the interlocal, we will pay for it, and then CPS will reimburse us just like the previous project as well. And I think as part of the project, it was about $83,000 was estimated that was CPS's portion. But again, we did the same ILA with CPS for the previous project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. We have a motion. Mr. Isbrand.
Mayor, council ought to approve, I'd make a motion to approve resolution number 2021-10-12 as stated.
Thank you, Mr. Isbrand. A second by Mr. Gregory. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Next up, we have 6.7, discussion and possible action on certification pay for the City of Castle Hills Fire Department personnel. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. Council. What I would like to do is discuss an item that we had for discussion previously as part of the budget process. We did discuss the certification education pay for our fire department personnel. And in discussion with our fire chief, I wanted to make sure I bring this back and bring this for y'all's review and potential action. What fire departments that does education and certification pay. And originally, it was in the proposed budget for, I believe, about 23,000. And so what we're looking at doing was first taking the longevity pay from the fire department, which was about 4,500, thus reducing this to about 18,000. Since then, Chief Ledwig, Ms. Davis, and I have revisited the fire department budget and the salaries. And my understanding is the way the salaries were developed for the proposed budget, this included a couple of personnel in the fire department that since left. So that's already plugged into the adopted budget. So we could absorb this into the current budget starting in January, and we would not have to amend the adopted budget that we just did last month. Also, what I'd like to have is Chief Ledwig discuss with you. As part of this discussion, what we are looking at doing is introducing some fees related to our permit and planning process and our fire chiefs from the fire chief's office that would eventually create revenue year to year for this and sort of in this case help mitigate that cost. So right now what we're proposing is approving the certification education plan for the fire department right now. And then obviously, as we go forward next year in the proposed budget, this can be reviewed again. But right now it can be absorbed. And in my opinion, obviously, that we should review certification P, not only fire department, but other cities do, because specifically it helps attract new employees. As for vacancies occur, it helps retain employees otherwise who might leave the organization. Our Castle Hills Police Department has had this for many years now. And so I look at it sort of as equitable for our first responders. You know, as you can see in the survey, a majority of the fire departments in San Antonio area provide certification and mostly education as well. Again, I believe we need equity in our first responders. Costs can be absorbed in the adopted budget currently, and we will not be losing anything related. We'll be losing the longevity portion. And I just wanted to make sure that we've lost 2 firefighters this year to other agencies who were getting paid more and had other benefit packages, including certification. And so we wanted to make sure we retain the good firefighters we have. And that's kind of why, you know, people move to Castle Hills is for our police and fire and our first responders and our dispatch. So we want to make sure that we're competitive and we can able to recruit and retain good employees. I'll turn it over to Chief. I'd like him to discuss some ideas about creating revenue for the permit and planning review for our fire chief and his office.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Chief, the way that the agenda is written doesn't give us a lot of latitude to go into that.
Yes, sir.
So I would keep it high so that Mr. Fletcher doesn't tell us to stop.
Well, and Mayor, the idea is that we would bring it back next month to discuss further, and we would amend the fee schedule accordingly.
Okay. And Council, Mayor, thank you for this evening. Bringing this back and giving me an opportunity to add to what the city manager said about we did lose, actually, we lost 4 firefighters this year to different departments. And we were able to attract other applicants. But this last go round, we actually only had 3 applicants that applied and 2 that ended up making it to the actual interview process, which we did have a quality applicant that we picked. But again, you know, investing in our current employees should be one of the main things that I feel that I should be doing for our employees, and also making sure that unfortunately, when we do lose employees, that we're able to attract other employees from other fire departments or even new firefighters straight out of the academy choose us to apply to based upon what we offer and the type of department that we are. As far as with the inspections, currently, there's a lot of inspections, a lot of things that we do on the fire side that kind of go unforeseen. And we haven't, as you can see with the survey, other departments in other cities on certain types of projects and building construction that involve fire department, we currently do not have fees for those. There's a lot of our inspections that we go out and do and a lot of plan reviews that go without being charged a fee. And so these are some of the revenues that we've come up with and that we'll present to you next month once I'm able to talk with Mr. Zamaron and we can work out a fee schedule. Again, without going into too much depth with it, kind of statistics, in the last 2 years alone that I've been here, we've done over 90 C of O inspections. And those are new businesses coming in or change of ownership or even change of name requires a C of O inspection. And a lot of those activities that we've done for these inspections have gone without charging any types of fees. So open to any questions.
Thank you, Chief.
Well, on the certification and education portion, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Gregory?
What is the purpose, the sole purpose by raising all these fees or introducing new fees?
Well, am I allowed to answer that?
I would just keep it pretty light because like I said, Mr. Fletcher will throw the flag out.
Well, it wasn't to fund the certification, but it was also, this had been something that I had talked with Mr. Zamaron for quite some time already. As far as you can see, what other cities are charging, it's pretty much industry standards. It assures that our time isn't being used as a type of free consultant. I know there's been many projects that I've literally gone out 8 to 10 times just to answer questions that normally would be answered by an engineer or a fire protection specialist or so forth. So this would kind of cut down on a lot of that time that's spent doing this. It is time spent by the firefighters, cost of materials, mileage, fuel, and so forth. So, and again, as you can see from the survey, these are all industry standards and we would still be charging in those guidelines.
I think, Councilman, we're introducing obviously expenses that would be year to year, and that's what we're introducing now as part of the education certification. And so the idea is that this revenue will sort of mitigate those expenses in the coming years. And we should introduce and we should be charging like other cities do in this case. But we can expand on that next month when we bring it forward.
It's basically along the same lines as what we currently do for residential and commercial construction. It's just the fire portion that has kind of fallen by the wayside and wasn't included in these costs.
Thank you.
Mr. Isbrand?
Based on what you just said, Mr. Rapley, I'll try to ask the question this way so that we stay within the parameters of this. So my understanding would be that at next month's council meeting, we would have some semblance of an idea of the frequency of each of these activities that has taken place in the past. So we could extrapolate a dollar figure to it.
Yes, sir.
To then put against this.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you.
And then that would also, we would, after having my meeting with Mr. Zamaron, we could also establish what fees that we're looking at charging as Castle Hills.
And again, Councilman, I think because we've revisited on the fire side on the salaries, because higher end personnel had left and we've introduced 2 new employees who are starting, we can absorb this now. And that was the idea of absorbing it. But as a policy, council has to approve that.
Right.
Just like they did for the police department years ago.
Yeah, and I fully appreciate and believe in equity, that there should be equity. I also appreciate the fact that this isn't just an ask of the council, but there's also a proposed solution to the funding of it because we get into an annual cost here. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
For efficiency purposes, there's some other things that we need to amend, I think, on the fee schedule. So we want to bring it all in one.
Mr. Paul.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. Number one, yes, I would not expect to do anything tonight without seeing laid out exactly what you're talking about. You enumerated a lot of opportunities, but I'd like to see the specifics. Number two, if you go back and look and see, it's my understanding that back when this certification program started, late 70s, early 80s, the fire department was also given the choice, and they chose longevity pay over this program. So the lack of equity, or equity, if you wish, was made by them being them at the time. So it's not a question of trying to be lack of equity, but you go back and look into that, and you'll find police department, as I understand it, took certification. Fire department chose the longevity. Now, that being said, it may be very well because some of the younger guys are looking around, keep going, keep moving through like all employees do everywhere. That may have not been as important to them now. So I don't want to put this on and say that the city failed to do their job, because that's not true as I understand it. You may find out something else, but I did look into it, and that was the information I got back.
Correct.
The other thing I wanted to mention too is when you're putting together numbers and looking at different things, well, first of all, I'm a little surprised because this should have been put to bed, pro or con, with our budget discussion. It should have been, we shouldn't be talking about this a month later because, as you say, it was brought up a different time. I see that already year to date, let's see, I looked at the budget briefly, but I think we budgeted $50,000 for overtime.
Yes, sir.
And through July, we're already at 45 and change.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to be over pretty good there, probably 75, 80,000 versus the 50. So when you look at all the different things, I'd like you to review that also. Thank you.
Mr. May, any questions? And so Chief, just so I can understand this, we'll be getting rid of the longevity pay and
Correct.
bringing in the certification pay.
Correct.
So basically, the firefighters will be making more, the people at the fire department will be making more based on the certifications they've earned as opposed to staying here longer.
Correct. And again, it promotes that continued education, the advanced training. I received the same information back in the 70s or 80s at the time with those employees that were there at the time. And of course, there's not any of those employees that are still with the department that were there at that time when they made that decision. Talking with, currently at the beginning of next year, we'll have 5 employees that have more than 20 years. And I explained to them what we were looking at doing, and they were 100% for doing exactly what the police department did, was giving up the longevity pay and adopting the certain education pay.
Excuse me, I was really addressing that because I didn't want the conversation of lack of equity
Yes, sir.
made by the decision of council at the time, because that's not the case.
Correct.
In fact, it sounds to me like council, whoever they were at the time, was more than generous to say, okay, what do you guys want to do? And what do you guys want to do? And I think that's great.
Yes,
But
sir.
that's history. I agree. Thank you.
So Chief, one of my concerns was making sure that the people that have built up the time don't feel like they're being not taken care of.
Right. Not at all. I took each one of them into my office and explained, and they were 100% behind transferring over to doing certain education pay instead of the longevity.
I'm personally a fan of empowering them to better themselves, because I
Yes.
believe that if they're more educated in what in their field, that only makes things better for the city of Castle Hills.
Absolutely.
What would the delta be? Is it between the longevity and the certification pay?
Well, as far as the difference, I mean, as the cost wise,
Yes,
or,
sir.
well, because currently we're paying annually $4,700 annually to cover longevity pay for all the firefighters. And as you know,
So roughly, Mayor, it was about 23.5 and we're reducing 4,700. So right about below
A
18.
little over 18,000 is the difference that we're still looking at funding.
And would the city pay for the educational advancements?
Yes, sir. We do have a training program, and that's what we have done in the past.
Do you foresee that getting ransacked
No,
in a
sir,
good
we,
way?
we still have to stay within our budget as far as training. And actually TCFP has required additional training for our officers, also for our inspectors. Above and beyond, we're required to have 20 hours every year, continuing education per firefighter. And if you are an inspector, you're required to have another 4 hours. There's also additional training needed for anyone that's an officer in our department. So now granted, we aren't paying for that certification. It's kind of included into their salary, but they are required additional training. So there is a lot of training that's required throughout the year, but we're actually, the plan that I put forth, other than the inspector and trying to attract higher levels of EMS service as far as paramedics and intermediates, everything else is along the same lines as what the other program within the city already with the police department.
Got you. Thank you, Chief.
Yes,
Mr. Isbrand?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wanted to ask one more question. So, which I think I know the answer to, but to make sure. So does this impact our contribution to TMRS?
I would have to,
I would think so
I would
slightly, but
assume so, but
I can
Yes,
get that breakdown, which is minimal because it was in comparison, because when you do the TMRS, you wrap in obviously the Medicare and insurance. So we can get that number, but it's a minimal increase,
yeah, because
probably year to year, depending on the rate too.
yeah, and again, that would be on the difference between, because the deduction of the longevity.
yeah, and I guess the reason I ask is because when I look at this and see the levels, if you go from intermediate to advanced to master, you're obviously making
sir.
incremental improvements
Yes,
there,
sir.
which has incremental costs. I think it'd be helpful to understand if there's any tertiary costs associated beyond what we see.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And can I answer Mr. Paul's question on the overtime? And we'll get with Chief Ledwig because he could provide a breakdown. But I think some of that had to do to obviously COVID and quarantine earlier this year, if I understand.
Yes,
Well,
and
maybe-
also with,
It may be, but you gotta look at the 19 also when you try to
Sure.
look at different comparisons.
Mhm.
Chief, I'm sorry to be monopolizing here, but I did have one more thing. Certification pay, is this it just because they're going to class or they actually got the master's or the bachelor's?
no, they actually have it.
If they're hired with a bachelor's, master's, do they automatically pick up the pay?
Yes.
So, okay. It's all foreign to me because I know when I first got out of school with my accounting degree, after about within my 5 years of what I was doing, I told them I was going to go apply I was going to go do my graduate work.
Mhm.
They said, great.